So, once again, happy Friday, everybody. Here we are, the Buddha Center, the temple, another Friday. Again, great to see everybody. Let's get started like we normally do. Short period of bell meditation. Wherever you are behind your avatar, just get into a nice meditation posture. And as I ring the Ching bell, the idea, focus on the sound of the bell. Really practice some deep listening. You'll probably get distracted. When it happens, just gently remind yourself, focusing on. This is so we can absorb some Dharma too. All right, give you a moment, get into a nice posture, and we'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dharma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. All right. So today, just a little history, if you will, a little character in Buddhist history. But let's also say that history teaches us impermanence. History teaches us causality, dependent origination, interconnectedness, interdependence. We can see all these things we talk about in Buddhism, we can see in history. Hello, Faye. So, today we're going to talk about Aśoka. Sometimes it's Aśoka, there's an H, sometimes there's not an H. Excuse me, and specifically, we're also going to talk about the edicts of Aśoka. Tales and legends of heroes and villains, just like history, they can teach us lessons. Factual histories of legendary figures can serve as examples. And that's kind of where Aśoka falls into the legendary figure that actually has a factual history. There is the King Aśoka of legend. By the way, the name is meaning painless and without sorrow. Well, and then there is the Aśoka of the 2001 movie. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the 2001 movie of Aśoka. It's pretty violent, pretty intense. And then there's the King Aśoka of history, whose actions and intent was a major cause of Buddhism spreading not only across the Indian continent, but to the islands of Southeast Asia, and in particular what was then Ceylon, what is now Sri Lanka. So Aśoka had a huge impact on Buddhism, the Buddhism that we practice to this day. In the year 1837, there was this Englishman that had been sent to India as a colonial administrator. His name was James Prinsep. The guy had a lot of different interests, as so many wealthy or sort of wealthy guys did back in that time. Well, he was an avid Anglo-Indian scholar. And through his years of working in India, he succeeded in translating an inscription on a large stone pillar that was in Delhi. And people had been trying to translate it for a long time. There's a great history in a great story in how that eventually got translated. And while many of these inscribed pillars and rocks had been known about for quite a time, scattered all across India, in fact, let me give you a sense here of how they were scattered across. Oh, the map was already up there. All right. Those are the locations of the edicts, the edict rocks, whether they were small or large, significant ones. So, but at that particular time, James Prinsep was the first to actually translate one of them. Nobody really knew what they said up to that point. European scholars like Prinsep had been actively rediscovering and then trying to decipher Indian literature beginning in the 19th century. So he started that then, trying to go through all this. And these studies were going on all across India and Southeast Asia. They started looking for this religion that they had heard about. This, at that point, they called it Bodha, Bouddha. So they were trying to find out about this religion and philosophy of Buddhism. They were trying to make it clear to them. And along the way, they started rediscovering these legendary histories of important figures, and in some instances, actually proving their historical existence and their historical importance. If you'd like more information on this, there is an excellent book that I just currently finished reading, and it is called The Search for the Buddha by Charles Allen. If you'd like to know more about how this all happened, it's really fascinating, and you can learn a lot about not only Buddhist history, but colonial history overall. Now, the inscription on the pillar at Delhi was found to be this series of edicts, or rules, if you will, issued by a king that was referred to as Beloved of the Gods, King Piyadasi. For decades after that, they found more inscribed stone pillars, and they found more rocks were uncovered. Let's see, let me spin here. So these are just an example of some of the forms that these edicts came in. So they began to uncover more of them and study more of them, and the scholars' ability to accurately, at least for their time, translate the language in both cultural and historical context, it grew. And as it did, so did the history of this particular king, this Piyadasi that they kept hearing about. Well, it wasn't until 1915 that they found this particular edict that was specifically had on there a connection between this Aśoka, who was a legendary figure at that point, and this King Piyadasi, who was seen as a historical figure. Well, it had been nearly 700 years that the story and legend of King Aśoka had been going around. He was this feared despot, but he had turned into a compassionate king. And they had been told this for years, but now they could believe it because they began to realize that it wasn't just legend, it was history. The legend, it spoke of this ruthless, violent prince who murdered his own brothers so that the Mauryan dynasty throne could be his. Once he became king, legend says he led his armies to slaughter and take into slavery the peoples of the surrounding lands, as many of them as he could get. And he ordered his army, show no mercy, give no quarter. They would go through towns and villages and just raze them to the ground. Done. Soon he ruled from the border of Persia, that was in the west, to the Ganges River Delta to the east, and then south through India. And only the state of Kalinga in the southeast of the country resisted this great power. Well, in 262 BC, Aśoka's armies, true to the orders that they had been given, swept across Kalinga, and they left little living in their wake. Man, woman, child, animal, done. 2 years later, it is said, in the legend, that he got sick with guilt over what he had done. And after learning of the Awakened One's teachings through his first wife, Devi, King Aśoka is said to have converted to Buddhism and then reversed the whole direction of his rule. It was he who ordered that his words be carved into these edict pillars and rocks across India. And then Aśoka went on to rule the land with the wisdom and justice that he took away from his, call it Buddhist experience, if you will. So Aśoka then steps from legend to historical fact. Because now, through James Prinsep and many others that came after him, there was physical proof that the stories of King Aśoka had a factual foundation. In 700 BCE, Aśoka did inherit the kingship of the Mauryan dynasty. That's a fact. He got it from his father, and he took the throne of, let's see if I can pronounce this right, Pataliputra. Now, whether the accounts that he did this over the bodies of his slain brothers, as some of the tales assert, we don't know, really. Or that contemporary translations on the rock edicts he was responsible for having erected state that his brothers and sisters were still alive during their construction. So the legend says he killed them, but the facts point to them still being alive. It is undisputed, though, that he was known to be a really vicious guy. Aśoka had been trained, just like his grandfather, Chandragupta, and he was also a king of the Mauryan dynasty. He was trained as a Brahmin, and so he held sway not only as a secular ruler, but also as a religious ruler. So he held both seats, if you will. The Mauryan army was loyal to their king and had solidified his rule through subjugation or conquering most of India. And fearing an incursion by the Greeks through Kalinga, he set his army to bring that state under his sovereignship, like I said, in 262 BCE. And it was a brutal campaign, and the majority of citizens of Kalinga were killed or made slaves. So we know this is fact. 2 years before the attack on Kalinga, his first wife, Devi, she was a really devout follower of the Buddha. They saw their son, Mahinda, and their daughter, Sanghamita, take monastic vows with the Buddhist sect of the elders, which we now know as Theravada. And it was soon after that that Mahinda and later Sanghamita went to Ceylon, what I said was now Sri Lanka, where they were instrumental in making Buddhism a very rich part of that culture. It is a historical fact that King Aśoka ruled and conquered without thought of lives lost, resources spent, and the extremely broad range of suffering that he caused. It is a historical fact found through archaeology and scholarship relating to the pillars and rocks that have the edicts on them that Aśoka changed his mode of leadership to one based on Buddhist principles of wisdom, tolerance, and compassion. What exactly happened to cause this monumental change of character is unknown. There's stories, though, right? There's legends. One just said he had a change of conscience, right? It was just that easy. He just got tired of the killing. But another, and I think maybe a little more believable, is his wife, Devi, kept telling him more about what she was learning from the Buddha, right? More of the Dharma. And then his son and daughter, they take vows. And this may have got him to start thinking, just like you and I started thinking when we first discovered Buddhism. How can it help me? Or can it help me? And if it can help me, what do I have to do? But in the end, it's kind of like the parable of the arrow. The reason that he did it really isn't that important. It's fun to play around with and think about. Buddhism received one of the greatest pushes forward that it had up to that point from Aśoka. He was responsible for building many new stupas, monasteries, and he even took to renovating existing Buddhist places. Some of them his own soldiers had pretty much knocked down to the ground. Aśoka instituted a dramatic and unexpected change in the way he governed and the way he commanded governmental authorities to act toward the people. And that's what these edicts, these rock edicts, were all about. The civil society of the Mauryan dynasty would start following the Buddhist teachings of wisdom, tolerance, and compassion. And King Aśoka became this wholesome agent of transformation, and a pretty dramatic one at that. He took a pretty obscure philosophy and religion at that point and transformed it into one that was spread all across the world as Aśoka knew it at the time. And following the tradition of the Awakened One's disciples, he sent missionaries, and they were called Dharma Mamatras, and he sent them out all over India and, of course, into Ceylon. Aśoka stayed committed to the polytheistic worldview of a Hindi Brahmin, but also accepted a commitment to promoting Buddhist principles in society and government. And again, that's what was on the edicts, how to treat people, or how the state now expected people to treat each other and to treat their government. And he further proved his commitment by organizing the Third Buddhist Council around 250 BCE at Pataliputra, which is Patna, by the way, in India on today's map. So his son and daughter basically brought Buddhism to Ceylon. Look what that did for us, right? That became one of the richest Buddhist areas in the world. And he said, oh, wow, I'm going to help convene this third council so even more of the Buddha's words can be written down. Pretty good goal. But this is where scholars get into a debate. And I'm say right off the bat, I think again, a fun debate, but does it really matter? Did Aśoka consider himself a Buddhist? Did he become a Buddhist or not? We don't know. But we do know that he began to rule his country under the ideals of Buddhism. He let that ideal of Buddhism meet the reality of what he was dealing with. So, does it matter whether he was Buddhist or not? No. He promoted the following of Buddhist moral principles and called all men his children. Get that whole bodhisattva in training kind of idea, right? Where the bodhisattva looks at others like their own child. But Aśoka did not abolish the death penalty. Kind of a paradox there in a way. But while Buddhist principles became governmental policy, he did not require his subjects to become Buddhist. So that might point us to the idea that he didn't become Buddhist himself. But as a polytheist who also revered the Buddha, he showed tolerance and even acceptance of the worldviews of others. And this attitude is evident in one of his edicts. And this is one of the edicts that was carved into a rock or a pillar in India. And this is what it said. I do not call truth what the foolish confront each other with. They make their own view of truth. That is why they speak, or that is why they treat their opponents as fools. So, not going to argue truth with others because we each have our own truth. Foolish or not. So during his reign, King Aśoka wrote 33 edicts, and they have been found carved on pillars and rocks throughout India. Now, also carved on there is words from the Dharma, right? Not just the edicts of King Aśoka, but he also had carved in there actual quotes from the Dharma. So his edicts were not technically Buddhist teachings, but they were more entreaties, maybe, or reminders for his people to practice the classic Indian virtues, of which Buddhism had promoted and highlighted, if you will. Some of these were written in Prakrit, others were written in Greek, and even some were written in Aramaic. The inscription on a minor rock edicts points to him taking Buddhism as his personal philosophy, but they're not sure. Translations are a little iffy on that one. This is what that particular one says. Thus speaks Aśoka, the beloved of the gods. Now there's that connection, by the way, with the King Payadasi, who was also called beloved of the gods. So, for 2.5 years I have been an open follower of the Buddha, though at first I did not make much progress. But for more than a year now I have drawn closer to the order and have made much progress. In India, the gods who formerly did not mix with men now do so. This is the result of effort and may be obtained not only by the great, but even by the small, through effort. Thus, they may even easily win heaven, unquote. So, kind of says there, right, that Aśoka became a Buddhist, or at least a follower of the Buddha. But there is some scholarly argument, if you will, about when this was actually carved into that particular stone. So who knows what we'll find out later. But during his 36-year reign, a major schism did develop that resulted in the two sects of Buddhism, the elders that we know as Theravada and the majority that we now. And this was all due to a minor doctrinal dispute, and then also a major dispute over who wielded authority over the weaker monks and nuns. Weaker being in air quotes, if you will. So the minor doctrinal disputes, by the way, had to do with times to eat and times to sleep was one of the big deals that they were dealing with. But it's interesting that those were considered minor, but the major dispute was who gets to be the boss. Buddhists are human too, right? But near the end, Aśoka was suffering from dementia and was in really ill health. And he did appeal to these two sects of Buddhism to set aside their differences, become one again, but it didn't happen, right? Again, Buddhists are humans. They chose different paths. It would be very difficult to bring them. But it's said that he tried. Well, in 231 BCE, Aśoka died, and Buddhism as the imperial philosophy ended. It was done. The next person who took over that particular rule said, this is too much for me. I don't believe in it. So, They just kind of pushed it to the side. And over the intervening millennia or so, some of the rocks got, of course, worn away, knocked over, used to build other things, but they're still being found around India, as that one map that I showed you. Just like yours and my legacies, they don't have to end when we die. Right? That's what legacy is all about. And I talked to you guys in the past about we want to leave that wholesome legacy, right? Teach somebody something good before we go, if you will. So Ashoka's legacy didn't end there. From his applying Buddhist principles to promote human flourishing and hosting a Buddhist Congress where large sections of the Pali Canon were either rewritten or written for the first time, the monks that he sent out among the people, his sons and daughters' efforts in Southeast Asia, and then the structures and the edicts carved into rock that remain until today, King Ashoka's karmic legacy continues to play a role both in Buddhist philosophy and practice even now. So Aśoka started out with let's call it a pretty violent relationship with the people around him. And he was able to change. He had let's call it a not so good relationship with the citizens, right? Because for the fact that he was killing a lot of them, but he was able to change. He went from kind of a relationship with the Dharma, because of his wife and his kids, to a full-blown relationship with the Dharma because he took it as a way to run a country, to say this is the way people should treat each other. And his relationship with his family obviously changed, right? He started out not believing. He had a wife and kids that did believe or did follow, and he eventually saw that that was maybe a better way to go, a more effective way to go. So this is a history that can point directly at us. Now, are our unwholesome habitual reactivities as dramatic as some of Ashoka's? No. But he was able to change. He was able to institute internal and external positive transformation for himself and his country. We're mostly just setting it out to do for ourselves, right? So that's making it a little easier. So any chance you get to look into Buddhist history, do so. Because you're not only going to learn about the history, but you're going to learn about the Dharma too. Because the Dharma being reality, it's all tied up in these histories. Some of them are positive, some of them not so much, but they can all teach us valuable lessons.